some time now, I've been trying to make my tDCS device, and if you've checked out my YouTube videos, you know that I've succeeded for the most part. But in this video, I just want to go through the different techniques I've explored in the past. And the first one was the most primitive one, and that's the resistors. You just use plain resistors, take a 9-volt battery, you stick the resistor in there, and you lower the current down to about 1 or 2 milliamps. Well, there's a huge problem with that, and that's the head resistance changes, so it's hard to maintain a constant current. And any shaking of the head or movements will cause the resistance to change, and you have to basically stay perfectly still. Otherwise, you'd have to keep altering the resistance, for example, with a potentiometer to maintain current resistance. So that wasn't very good. I just put babies on there because it's just one thing. You just need a battery, resistor, and sponges. But the next one I saw was one made by BRM Labs. It's probably still up. And this one uses a voltage regulator. And what regulators do is that it just keeps something constant. And if it's a voltage regulator, it keeps the voltage constant. I made it, and I couldn't get the current to stay constant. And I wasn't sure. I suspected the problem is still with the resistance. By keeping the voltage constant, that means the only thing that can change is current and resistance. If a resistance changes, such as in the case with a resistor, then the current's going to change. So this is really no better than using a plain old resistor. I might have did something wrong, but I don't know. I followed the schematic pretty well. The one I currently have, my current tDCS device uses this one. Uses a transistor. Uses this type of transistor. It's a LM334Z current regulator. So these are actual current regulators. So it keeps the current constant by varying the voltage. And you could check out my tutorial on my YouTube channel, Box It, which is youtube.com/sciencemusicreason, or you could just type tDCS into YouTube, and it's on the front page. So this is the model that uses the transistor. It's all tangled up, and I'm not going to use this one anymore. The ends of the sponge is like a few months old. The alligator clips are really corroded because it's a copper alligator clip, and I'm low on batteries and everything. So, and it's pretty nice, but it's still too chunky for for what I want to do. I just want to have a little cap, and then just when I have a cap on, just put it on and start studying. So this is a little bit too chunky. Then what I'm working on now, it looks like this. But of course, well, I'm not even close to being done because I don't have the parts. I ordered it, and they haven't come. They haven't come yet, but they will soon. So basically, what I'm making now is an HD tDCS device. It's a multi-channel device. So the currents will go through the cathode, and then as it enters the anode, and as it goes through the cathode, it was split into 4, 5, 6, however many anodes or cathodes I want, and then the current would be split into each of the 5 or 4 cathodes sponges, and that would make it so that you would reduce the effects of the cathode, which is to basically make the part of the brain dumber wherever you put it on. And I just have the LED there just to see if it's if the circuit's connected or not. And I only have 2 transistors for the cathode because I ran out of transistors. So right when I get more, I'll complete this. The next one is something I just found out, and I was like, oh my gosh, if I knew about this earlier, this would have been so much easier. And this one is a diode. So current regulating diodes, not Zener diodes or some other type of diode. These are current regulating diodes. And unlike Zener diodes, it isn't a little tubular sort of object. It looks just like a transistor with 2 legs. And all it does is you can buy 1 milliamp or 2 milliamp or half milliamp diodes, current regulating diodes, and literally you just plug it in like a resistor. The drawback is that you can't change the current with just the regular circuit. But if you have multi if you have switches that has multiple settings, so you can have multiple paths, you can just use multiple diodes, a diode for 0.5 milliamp or 1 milliamp and 2 milliamp. You can use all three of those, and see if you have a switch that allows you to switch between 3 paths, then that'll work. Finally, you could use, well, actually 2 more. Oh yeah, finally, you can use other more complicated ones, such as pre-programmed integrated circuits. There's there's probably hundreds of these you can find. This is just one of them, the LM39236. It's basically the same. There's input and an output, and in between the input and the output, there's always some sort of configuration saying you can always just mess around and to alter it. I think typically these are made to be very, very efficient. So if you want something to be, I guess, commercial product, you might want to use these. So I just want to talk about now the difference between regular tDCS and HD tDCS. There's actually a pretty big difference. The typical regular tDCS you've seen, like the one I have here, and what is it, Folk.us, the manufacturer of tDCS devices, and a bunch of other tDCS devices which manufactures regular tDCS. Regular tDCS has basically two sponges. One sponge for the anode, other sponge for the cathode. So the electricity will go through from the anode, which is by definition the anode is where electricity comes from, and then out through the brain and throughout the cathode. Well, the problem is that the anode makes your brain stimulates the brain to produce or to release more neurotransmitters, whereas the cathode reduces the brain's release of neurotransmitters. Well, if you're wanting to make your brain smarter, one area smarter, you also don't want to make your other part of the brain dumber. So so what you want to do is you want to maximize the effect of the anode while minimizing the effect of the cathode. Currently, researchers have multiple ways of doing this. The one I'm doing, or the research I'm doing, in the neuroscience department, we usually just put it on our shoulder. But there is a problem with that too, because the electricity goes through the brain from the anode, and then all the way down it reaches to the cathode, and the effects of it are kind of diminished as well. So, and other people also suggested using larger cathodes, but I don't think that's how electricity works. Electricity wants to go through the fastest route, and if you have a large cathode, it might just ignore much of a large sponge. It might just ignore a lot of the sponge, so it wouldn't make any difference. So what you have is the goal of tDCS is to be very focalized. You don't want to mess around with much of the brain. You just want to focus just on one part of the brain, because if you mess around with a lot of the brain, you can often kind of screw up some stuff. Like I've noticed, if I put on the wrong part of my head, no matter what sponge it is, I sometimes feel really bad, like depressed bad. So you don't want to mess up. You just want to target one specific part of the brain that you want, and that's where the HD tDCS comes in. You can have a very tiny little sponge, and just put it in, say for example, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and it won't stimulate too much of the other part of the brain, because you'll have 4 other sponges that's or 4 or 5, 6, whatever, that makes a bullseye sort of thing around the central anode sponge. And what happens is the currents will travel from the anode sponge out throughout the cathode sponges, but the electricity will be spread out so much that that's diluted to a point where it's basically not causing any inhibitory effect. So overall, HD tDCS is much better than regular tDCS. I'm trying to make one right here. It's not nearly complete because I don't have the parts that I need, and I don't know if it's going to work yet because I've never tried it. But yeah, so this is basically the summary of all the tDCS stuff I've been doing in the past few years, for really just for fun. And I was always interested in looking for ways to make myself smarter. After talking to this genius girl I met from a friend, that just totally refreshed my interest in becoming smarter. She's 16. She's a senior in college, and she knows fluently over 10 programming languages, from Java to C++ to MATLAB to everything. So I'm jealous, sort of, and I want to catch up. Yeah.